Okay, so some of my students have asked me about lids in general, and rather than showing several different lids in several different classes, I thought I would make various different lids in different classes and make videos of them so they can watch them on YouTube. What we've got here looks a bit like an urn actually in terms of size. Maybe it could be a cookie jar, but this is a type of a jar that could very easily have a lid. So I'm going to create a lid for this jar right here. This would be called a jar, I guess. So I'm going to start out by taking a measurement here using these calipers here to get an idea of where I want to land in the end. So it's about that wide in diameter. I'm going to hand this to someone in a moment so I can get this thing off here. There you go. She got it. Now, I'm not sure exactly how to get a good estimate in terms of how much clay to use. This is probably actually too much, but I am going to be able to borrow a needle tool hopefully at some point, which I will need in order to a sponge. There's a sponge. Thank you. You set it right there. I'll grab it. I'll be able to adjust the size, the amount of clay I use as I'm throwing. All right, so there's my pot. So I'm going to start this one, this lid. Centering my clay. I'm going to make it pretty low. And I'm going to open it off center like that. Okay. This is going to become my knob. I'm going to deal with that later. Actually, I think I'll deal with that first. Get this stuff semi out of my way. And I'm going to turn this into some sort of decorative knob. Actually, I'm going to just generally get it about the size that I want. I'll finish it up later. Right now, I'm going to get underneath this here. Got underneath that. And I'm going to pull this thing out. I'm going to pull it all the way out until it's about the thickness that I want. I can tell you this lid is definitely too big. That's actually intended, or I knew that was going to happen. I'm mostly focusing on the thickness of this clay, not on the size of the lid at this point. Because at this point, I can determine this isn't even that much small. That's a huge lid. It's actually pretty close to what I want. But I'm going to trim off some of it anyways, just to make the point that I could have pulled it out to whatever thickness, and then I could have easily taken off the excess to make it whatever size that I want. So this thing, as you can imagine, is going to sit inside the lid of that pot. So I want to keep an eye out, generally the shape that I'm looking for that's going to fit nicely, and I want to figure out how big this thing's going to be. I'm going to actually, I think it would have been better off to have done this instead. Would have been better if I had something to work on like this. Because of that knob in the middle, it's probably better if I had this thing to work with instead, so I can figure out, still want to remove a little bit more of that. Somewhat depends on what I want to do with that lid. Do I want this lid to kind of set up on top and kind of sit out? But I don't think I do. I think I'd prefer the lid sat a little bit below the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and remove a little bit more. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller than the top so that this thing will set down inside that area. Okay, so that should sit down inside. And now I can get creative with this if I want. I'm really not thinking about very much about what I want to do here other than just to be creative. I'm make it interesting. Picturing that I'm reaching over and grabbing that as I'm reaching in for cookies. So this is the first lid for that pot, or lidded pot. I'll take it over here. I'll have my videographer follow me over there real quick so you can look at them both together. Actually, just you hand that back to me. All right, so you can imagine how that's just going to sit right down in the top of this. And this thing is this big. It's a little smaller than that, right? And that thing is, actually I think this is probably still a little bit too big. I'll make it a little smaller. Now it is key that these things get thrown on the same day unless you take measurements ahead of time. I think that's going to be a little bit big. So I'm going to take a little bit more off of this. But you've already kind of seen how I'll do that. I'm going to trim a little off to make it fit. And that's basically how to create this handle. Now this handle is not going to be easy to trim because as you imagine you have to turn it over. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pot and I'm going to hunker it down and I'm going to center the pot, the cookie jar. And then I'll take the lid and I'll turn it upside down in the cookie jar and trim the bottom of it with in that way. I'll use my actual jar to trim this thing as I'll turn it upside down in the jar and trim the bottom. All right, there's your first lid.